The reading today is Micah 2, verses 1 to 4. Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light they carry it out, because it is in their power to do so. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud people of their homes. They rob them of their inheritance. Therefore the Lord says, I am planning disaster against this people, from which you cannot save yourselves. You will no longer walk proudly, for it will be a time of calamity. In that day, people will ridicule you. They will taunt you with this mournful song. We are utterly ruined. My people's possession is divided up. He takes it from me. He assigns our fields to the traitors.
Today is the last Sunday of Advent. This year it's just 5 days before Christmas Day. And we come to the end of our series of pieces of an Advent puzzle found in the Old Testament. Today's piece is found in Micah 5, 1 to 4. And part of it is best known to us from Matthew's quotation of it in chapter 2, verse 6 of his Gospel. I'm going to look at this passage from three perspectives. Perspectives which can be seen as making up the meaning of the Advent season for us as Christians. First, we will stand with God's Old Covenant people who looked forward to the promised King, the Messiah. Then, as God's New Covenant people, we will celebrate the fulfilment of that promise in the person of Jesus. Finally, still as God's New Covenant people, we will look forward to the larger fulfilment which will come when Jesus returns. So first, looking forward to Jesus. In some ways, the people of Judah in Micah's day were like young children looking forward to Christmas Day. Parents can probably remember, or if their children are young, they don't have to remember, they are experiencing now the way children, particularly young children, look forward to Christmas. I have one particularly vivid memory of looking forward to Christmas because of something that happened. I think I was 5 years old, but it was shortly before Christmas, and I had an accident. And I was really upset because my mum had, among the things that my mum warned me against, one she emphasised, I guess because our house was newly built, was not to tread on any nails, particularly rusty nails, because I could get tetanus, lockjaw. Well, of course, on this particular day, very shortly before Christmas, I trod on one. And there I was standing in the bath while my mum doctored me, looked after the toe that I'd put the nail into, and used some disinfectant, I think. And the thing that was uppermost in my mind, I figured I was going to die because Mum had talked so much about being dangerous. But it was just a few days before Christmas. And so I was desperate to know and asked Mum, will I live to see Christmas? That was so important. Christmas was a great thing just looming on the horizon, and I didn't want to miss it. I didn't know what presents I would get, but I knew they would be good, and I expected Christmas Day to be a wonderful day. Well, in the same way, the people who received Micah's message didn't know exactly what would happen when the Messiah came, but they knew it would be a wonderful day and that God would do great things through the Messiah. But unlike young children looking forward to Christmas, they didn't know when the great day would be. And Micah prophesied at a time of great need. Social injustice was rampant, and Micah, like his contemporary Isaiah, addressed this fearlessly. But Micah also spoke words of hope, including when the nation's welfare was threatened by the power of Assyria. And our passage this morning includes such words of hope. Beginning at verse 1. Marshal your troops now, city of troops, for a siege is laid against us. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. Now this is almost certainly a reference to the attack by Sennacherib of Assyria in 701 BC, when disaster threatened and Hezekiah, the king of Judah, was treated with humiliating contempt. The northern kingdom of Israel had already fallen to the Assyrians, so Israel here is presumably used in the broad sense of the Old Covenant people of God, whose only surviving ruler now was Hezekiah, the king of the southern kingdom. This southern kingdom of Judah itself only survived at this time because of God's direct intervention. But Micah looks ahead to a greater intervention. Verse 2, "But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." Bethlehem was indeed small, not even being listed among 46 cities of the tribe of Judah in Joshua chapter 15. But it did have importance because it was King David's birthplace. So Micah's words would have been understood to look forward to a great king of the line of David. The ancient origins would probably have been understood to refer either to David himself or back beyond him to Abraham and God's promise to bless many nations through Abraham. But when Jesus comes, something greater than that can be seen. Immediately, however, Micah warns his audience that this great king will not come yet. Verse 3, "Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labour gives birth, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites." Abandonment will come before fulfilment. And from our perspective in time, we know that this abandonment would involve Judah's falling to the Babylonians. But now Micah returns to the hope of the coming king, the king who is the great hope of God's people. Verse 4, "He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth." Now the timing is still unknown, but the extent of the blessing which will come through this shepherd king is deeper and wider than they have so far realised. This is what awaited God's old covenant people, and its fulfilment would include those who were at that time outside the boundaries of the nation of Israel. It would include Gentiles who put their faith in Jesus Christ. So I come to celebrating fulfilment. And of course we are among those included in God's promise through the prophet Micah. But for us, this is no longer purely a future hope. Jesus, the Messiah, has come, and we're able to celebrate the fulfilment of God's promise through Micah and numerous other promises recorded in the Old Testament. This is true especially at the Christmas season, but not only at the Christmas season. Matthew points us in the direction of celebration when he quotes from Micah. This is clear if we consider the narrative within which the quotation occurs. Matthew records that Magi from the east, scholars who studied the stars, came to Jerusalem seeking the recently born King of the Jews. Their arrival conveys to us that this king is not only for the Jews, but for Gentiles as well, for all people. And their purpose in travelling to Jerusalem from the distant east tells us how all people should respond to this king, both then and at all future times, because they have come to worship him. King Herod, however, doesn't wish to worship. In Matthew's wording, he is disturbed. He sees the great king, the Messiah, as a threat to his lesser kingship, though not lesser in his own eyes, of course. Matthew will reveal later that Herod intends to remove this threat, but for now he asks the apparently legitimate question of where the Messiah was to be born. The priests and scriptural scholars whom he consults know the answer to this question, and they declare that the Messiah, God's promised king, is to be born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is the birthplace of King David, and so the fitting birthplace of the promised king from the line of David. Their reply includes reference to the prophet, that is, to Micah, and this gives Matthew opportunity to quote from Micah 5. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Now, you might have noticed there is one surprise in this quotation. Micah says that Bethlehem is insignificant, is small among the clans of Judah. But Matthew seems to reverse this, to say that Bethlehem is by no means insignificant. The explanation, however, is simple. Micah spoke of what had been the case and contrasted this with what was to happen, whereas Matthew speaks from the perspective of fulfilment, the birth of the Messiah, which makes Bethlehem great, not small. Matthew also leaves out some of Micah's words, but his original audience would have thought of those words. They would have remembered that the origin of this promised king were from of old, from ancient times. And if they put these words together with other information provided by Matthew, they would have been able to look back further than Micah's audience would, beyond David, and even beyond Abraham, to God himself, the Ancient of Days. The newborn king of Matthew's Gospel is Emmanuel, which means God with us, and he is rightly to be worshipped. And at the end of Matthew's Gospel, he speaks with all authority in heaven and on earth, in sending out his followers to proclaim the gospel of which he is the centre. So we should celebrate this Christmas. We should worship the great King who has come. We should remind each other that our King is Jesus, the Son of God. And we should take any opportunity which God gives us to tell others why we celebrate. But we should also remember that the great story of King Jesus is not yet complete. We are still looking forward. We can look back to the birth of Jesus and, of course, to his life, his death, and his resurrection. But we are still looking forward to the day when he will enter into the fullness of his rule, the day when every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. When Micah prophesied, injustice flourished in Judah, and the greatest human power in the world was harshly oppressive Assyria. When Matthew recorded the birth of Messiah Jesus, he recorded also that the response of King Herod to his birth was to try to kill him and to slaughter young children in the attempt. And today, we live in a world where injustice still flourishes. and a world in which many powerful people refuse to acknowledge God, using their power instead to oppress the weak. So as we look back to what God has already done, as we celebrate the coming of Jesus into the world, we also need to look forward to what God is yet to do, to Jesus coming again in triumphant power and wonderful glory. This is the final note of Advent and an essential part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. All human beings, including Christians, live in an imperfect, sin-damaged world. But those who worship Jesus Christ as Lord and King are citizens of the perfect world which is yet to come. Praise the Lord.